Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, we're going to be looking at using .NET classes and objects within PowerShell. So kind of the point of why I might want to get into this is because there's not always going to be a PowerShell commandlet that's, going to do exactly what you maybe want PowerShell to do. So remember that PowerShell is built on top of the .NET framework and has the ability to tap into that to utilize, every class and the properties and methods that go with them for objects in the .NET framework. So we're going to look at regular commandlet output. We're going to look at calling .NET classes, utilizing .NET documentation and constructors, using .NET to verify credentials, and using .NET to audit group memberships and Active Directory. So the last two here, verify credentials and group memberships, these are just a couple of examples that we might want to utilize .NET for. Okay, so if you're looking for kind of a, why I might want to do this, this could be a couple practical examples, but it's definitely not limited to just those things. Okay, so let's switch over to our lab environment here, and we'll kind of start off. So when we're talking about, let's say, regular commandlet output, what I mean by that is like, let's say we have a, like let's say a typical PowerShell console, and I go ahead and I type something in it. So maybe like if I do a get service, and we go ahead and run that, and remember that every commandlet that produces output produces it in the form of a .NET object. And you could see that by piping that output over to get member. Right? And then we can see what .NET object we're going to be working with in PowerShell's pipeline. Okay, so with our commandlets here, they do produce these .NET objects that we want to utilize, right? Now, with that being said, though, that's again relying on what's produced by a commandlet. So I would need the correct commandlet to produce the correct .NET object to do, let's say what I want to do. And that's not always going to be feasible or going to happen because there's frankly just not enough commandlets to cover outputting of every .NET object I might want to work with. Okay? And sometimes they may be, I don't want to say lacking, but it just might not have enough on it for maybe what you wanted to do. So for instance, like when we get into the Active Directory examples, if I do something like get AD user, that produces, if I pipe that to get member, an AD user object, and that does have some limitations to it on maybe some of the administrative activity that I want to do. Right? So regular commandlets and the .NET objects that those commandlets produce for output are not always going to be perfect for what you want to do. Right? So let's say let's say we'll do something like this here. Let's change directory back to C colon Windows, and let's do a get child item of just, let's say, the files, right? So let's say I have this output of the Windows directory on my VM here, my test computer, and I see, the actual files. And let's say I want to work with the length, right? So I see the length, that would be the size of the file. And the length is currently in bits, which is not, or, no, I'm sorry, bits, bytes. So the length is currently in bytes. And I'm not necessarily wanting to use that as a good size mechanism. So maybe I might want to view it in kilobytes or maybe megabytes or something like that. So I could take the output from this and maybe send it over to select object, and the properties that I want, I'll keep the name property because I want that. And let's say I want to do a calculated property here. So I can make my hash table for my calculated property. The name is going to equal whatever I want to call the property here. So maybe I'll say size KB. So let's say that's the the new property I'm making. That'll be its name, and then the expression. Let's say just out of the box, I'll take the object that's in the pipeline. So that would represent each of these individual file objects here. So that would be dollar underscore. Dot is my separator, and I want to work on the length property. So just right there, that's enough code that you can get this customized output that you're looking for. All right. Now with this though, I could potentially go a little further with it by maybe taking the length and divide it by, let's say, 1 KB. If you're not familiar with PowerShell, let me just show that separately here. 1 KB in PowerShell, it knows how many bytes that is. 1 MB, and so on. So you could take a number that's in bytes and then divide it by 1 KB, 1 MB, 1 GB, whatever, and convert it into kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, whatever you're looking for. So to bring this back up, we'll take length and divide by 1 KB. And we could see the answer that we're getting here. Now, unfortunately, though, we have a problem. Okay? In that you'll notice that in the math is not always clean, right? So not everything divides out by 1 KB, or you're in essence dividing it by 1024. So it doesn't look, let's say, that great. So for instance, look at how many decimal places are on here. Okay, so that would be the first example of, let's say, using a .NET object. Okay, so, or a .NET class in this case, .NET class, get my vocabulary right here. So in .NET, there is a math class. So in the namespace system, so system.math, and you can open that up. Okay, looking at the Microsoft documentation. So this used to be docs.microsoft.com. Very recently, I've noticed they've moved it over to learn.microsoft.com. So I'm recording this video beginning of October 2022. So I've just noticed that fairly recently. So if you go into the math class, don't want to give anybody, flashbacks from like, going back to school, like, hey, we're in math class again. But yeah, that's what it actually is. And we go in and look at, let's say, the methods on it. So methods represent actions you can take against an object, and properties represent facts about that object. So in this case, we're looking for, and there's a lot of methods on here. There's a lot of math we could do here. But specifically, I'm looking for the round method. Right? So with it, I can look at, I mean, there's a lot of different rounds here if you kind of, have a gander at it. And what you're basically looking for is one that accepts, let's say, the arguments that you're looking for. Okay, so for instance, like we see decimal and int 32 here on this particular method. And if I crack it open, so I could see the decimal to be rounded would represent the first argument. So that's that decimal part there. And then the number of decimal places and the return value. So literally like how many, how much precision do I want? 2 decimal places? Do I want 3 decimal places? Do I want 5 decimal places? So you have that. So with round, I can present it with these 2 arguments. That's what's in the parentheses here. And we should get what we're looking for. Okay, so let's say, for instance, I'll just take a number and maybe $n for number, and I will put, let's say, this long one in here. Okay, so now that's in $n. Right? Now what I could do is I can call the math class to round that. So to call the math class, you use a bracket. You put the name of the class you want to call, then 2 colons, and then the method. So I wanted the round method, and then our argument list. So inside the argument list, we're going to do 2 arguments, $n, that was the number that we wanted to round, comma, and then let's say I want 3 decimal places. And notice, actually 3 is kind of bad because the third one was a 0 there. So it did technically round to 3, but it dropped the 0 on it. So maybe if I wanted, let's do 4, that'll be a little better. Yeah, so there's my 4 decimal places. If you do one and there's just zeros, it'll just drop them. So that's why 3 looked like 2, but in fact, if I wanted to do 2, I can get that. All right, now it is indeed rounding. So if you notice, it was 1.940, so that became 1.94. Notice when I did the 4 decimal places, 1.9404. All right, because the one after that was a 2, so it rounded down to the 4. All right, so rounds just like we learned when we were in grade school, if you will. All right. So now let's say if I wanted to incorporate that back into my calculated property here, what I could do is this whole thing right here produces the number I want to round, right? So that in essence would be what's being put into there, right? So basically I need to take this and incorporate it into the expression part of my calculated property. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to start off again with calling math, then the round method, and then let's say there's the opening, and then there's the closing, right? So there's the opening and the closing for the entire argument list. Now inside the argument list, I need this to be one unit, if you will. So one piece of data. So I need this, math to happen separately. So to do that, I need to put that in its own parentheses. That's going to look weird. And then, so that's the first value. So this parenthesis right here, all the way to here, that's kind of representing your $n. And then after that, you've got the comma, and then how many decimal places you want, and then closing of the argument list. All right, so if I go ahead and do that, notice how everything is now nicely rounded, okay, to the 2 decimal places. If you want to do 1 decimal place, you could do that. 3 decimal places, whatever you're looking for. All right, so that's utilizing the math class and the round method on that. Okay, which again, you saw me Google search that, to find that class and then find the methods available within it. So there's a ton that go with the math class for different math operations you want to do. All right. Now to look at another one, this is one I use in scripts sometimes, where if you ever see sometimes in a script, if it prompts for credentials, there is a get credential commandlet where you can put in, credentials that that you want to use, and it stores it as a PS credential object. So in fact, I should have stored that in a variable. Let's say $cred equals, right? So let me put this in again. Sorry about that. All right. So I put something in there, and if I look at $cred, I could see the username and then the password in a secure string format, right? And if I look at $cred, pipe it to get member, I can see it is a PS credential object, okay, out of this namespace. Right? So this is utilizing this class out of this namespace. So that's all well and good. However, when you're running get credential, the problem with it is it always pops up a dialog. right? So a person has to be running the script and supplying that in kind of a graphical dialog box. Now, that's all well and good if it's a person that's running the script, but what if it isn't? What if you have this script running as maybe part of an automated process and you want to feed the credentials in as just regular parameters? Okay, so maybe you have the credential values in like a text file, or maybe they're being pulled from somewhere else or something, right? Where you want to create a script that'll run automatically and maybe being fed, let's say, credential information. So in that case, it might be handy to be able to create this PS credential object on its own without having to use get credential. Okay, so we have a big hint right here, as in this is the object that was created, when we used get credential. So if I kind of take that and go, let's say, put this back into a search engine um, that I want to use here. So why does that not go into Google? So let's say we'll throw this in here and have a look at the search results. Specifically, I'm looking for the Learn results or the Microsoft results because that's the actual documentation. So you could see there is a PS credential class. And so if I bring that up, I could see documentation on that class. So we could see, here's the namespace, system.management.automation, and PS credential class. Now, if I want to create an object from this class, what I'm looking for on the class is a constructor. So a constructor basically makes an object out of that class. Okay, and then that object can have, properties and methods on it. Okay, but a constructor is what's going to do that. So of the two constructors available, they kind of behave like methods in a way, in that you have the name of the constructor and then you have values you're going to feed into it. So notice here you could see string and then secure string. So if I open up this particular constructor, the first string argument is going to act as the username. Okay, so that would be the username in your credential object. And the second argument is going to act as the password, and it will accept as a secure string value. Okay, so if we feed a regular string as the username and a secure string as the password, we can make ourselves a PS credential object as well. All right. So maybe let's go ahead and do that. Now, for putting together, let's say the secure string. So the username, I mean, you could just, whatever your user is that you want to create the credential for. Like I made one for my account called admin, okay, which is fine. And I need the password in as a secure string. So if we look at help for secure string to see if there's a commandlet to do that for us, we could see that there's convert to secure string, which could take a string and make a secure string value out of it. All right? So maybe we'll call it $SS for secure string, and let's use that. So convert to secure string. The string that I want, let's do, how about YouTube 1 in honor of the fact this is a YouTube video. And we want to do, let's see, we're feeding that in as plain text and force. Okay, so those are the parameters that go with it. So I do that, and if I look at $SS, notice, again, if I pipe it to get member, I can see, in fact, I have a secure string. All right. So now, to utilize that constructor, let's say we'll do $cred2 equals, and let's do new object, because again, we're going to use that constructor, right? So we're making something out of system.management, if I can spell, management.automation .ps credential. Okay, so again, that was what we were, that's the class that we're using. So we're using the constructor out of that. Um, and for the constructor, we're taking the one that uses two arguments. So the first argument is going to be the username, which in this case, maybe I'll just do admin. And then the second argument was the secure string, which I have in my variable $ss. Close that. And typically when you're doing new object, you don't just want it to come spit out to the pipeline, hence why I'm putting it in a variable. So I could save it and use it later on in this console, later on in a script, something along those lines. So let's go ahead and hit enter on that. And if I look at $cred2, I could see that in fact, pipe it to get member, I did in fact make a PS credential object with the username and the password in there. All right, so that's it's pretty handy for right there. Okay, so we researched the object in question. All right, so PS credential was the class I was looking for. I can see that there's two constructors, and I used the one that took string and secure string as the arguments. I used new object um, with the class that I want to make the object from, and then the arguments that go with the constructor that I wanted to use. Okay, and then that created what I needed here. All right, so now let's move into something, let's say maybe a little more complex. Right? Now, with this, let's say I wanted to, let's say I had a script that, as part of it, someone has to input credentials, and then it does some administrative action. Right? Now, what what I might want to do, so I know that the script works, is maybe validate the credentials of whoever was supplied in when I'm running the script. So that way, if the credentials are not any good, I don't really waste a lot of time with running the script. I can just have the script out, kick the script out and say, it was good or it wasn't good. The credentials, mind you. So how can I go about doing that? So you cannot query Active Directory to get the actual like username and password info. You can't do that. But what you can do is you can utilize a .NET class to ask Active Directory if the credential that the user supplied is good or not. Okay, so you're basically asking, hey, is this credential good or is this credential not good? And it can return like a true or a false from that. All right. So that's what we're looking for. Now, if you're first starting out, sometimes when you're at the stage of, well, this is what I'm looking for, you don't necessarily know where to go. So let's say, let's go back to Google here. And I remember looking this up, a few years ago, um, and, wanting to do something like this. And basically what I did, was I think I used a Google search term of .NET verify credentials, something like that. And then you're kind of, you're looking through the bulk of internet results, if you will. Right? So for instance, here I see this Stack Overflow post right here. Validate a username and password against Active Directory. Right? And so this is kind of like you're in the ballpark here of like, let's say, you want to do something to Microsoft Outlook, let's say. I want to maybe stop documents or stop emails from being purged out of the deleted items folder, right? And someone tells you, hey, you could do that through the registry. Okay, but they're not telling you where in the registry it is. So you have to search for that. Search the internet, search blog posts, forum posts, tutorials, maybe you look at a YouTube video, something, and you're trying to figure out where the registry key and value are that you need. Okay, so there's no set procedure on how to do that. So again, if you're coming at this from a developer perspective, there might be a standard way of finding, a .NET class that you're looking for. But for those of us that are not programmers, which I certainly do not consider myself to be a programmer or a developer, in a lot of cases we're just winging it. And when we just wing it, it basically means you're searching, the internet. So come up with, some search terms, search it out, and see potentially what's out there. So what I'm looking for here is they're, showing an example here, and they give me um, a namespace right there, and inside that namespace, it looks like they're calling a principal context object. Okay, now the code that they're showing here is C# code, which is fine, but you can look at it and potentially see the class that you're looking for and maybe the method that you're looking for in that class. So that could potentially be handy, right? So that was system, directory services, account management. So that namespace. So let me kind of grab that and let's, maybe search that out and look for that principal context object was what it was, right? So yeah, so they're calling the principal context class out of this namespace. Okay, so let's see if that has something there. So here's the namespace off of learn. Okay, and then the classes in it. So let's see. So that was principal context. So I open that up, and into that, we've got a number of constructors here on how to make a principal context object, which is fine. Um, and then let's see on the methods. Yeah, there's a validate credentials method. Okay, so that might be where we're at. Okay, so I would need to make an object out of this class and then call the method from that object. Okay. So let's see. So what are we going to need here? So for the constructor, there's a few different constructors here that are making, as I say, a new instance of the principal construct class. So new instance is when you're making an object from a class. Okay. So, start at the first one because it looks like the easiest. Principal context, and then we need a context type. So I open that up and I see again for the arguments. So here's your object or here's your class, and to make an instance from that class, I need to specify a context type that looks like the simplest constructor that they had. And so you need to specify a context type. Problem, I don't know what a context type is. So if you look in the parameters, you can see context type, and there is a link on it. So an enumeration basically is a value specifying the type of store for the principal. So an enumeration's like, hey, it could be one of a certain amount of acceptable values, and I just need to know what those are. So if I look at the context type documentation and go into here, I could see, for instance, on a context type, there's three possible things it could be: machine, domain, and application directory. Right? So one of those three. So in my case, I'm querying against Active Directory, so the domain is going to be the one I'm interested in. Right? So we're going to use that constructor to basically make a connection to Active Directory is what this is looking like. All right. So in order to do that, I would need to kind of do the same thing I did with making the PS credential object. I need to use the new object commandlet. So let's do $ds for let's say I don't know, directory services, right? So let's do new object, and we're doing a new object from system dot directory services, the dot account management. Waiting to see if that tab completes. No. Dot account management dot principal context. Guys, that's what we're making. Long story short. Right? So here was our object, principal context out of this namespace, so system.directoryservices.accountmanagement.principal context, and we were using the constructor that took the context type, which we already looked up and found we could use the word domain as that enumeration. Okay, so we'll use that as the argument, literally the word domain, and go ahead and make it. Now, if you get an error like this, this namespace may not be loaded into your PowerShell session. So that might be something of concern here. So notice cannot find type, system, directory services, account management, principal context. Verify the assembly containing this type is loaded. Okay, so it's a bit of code here, but to see the assemblies you currently have loaded, what you could do is call a different .NET class here, the app domain one, and call the method current domain, and from that get assemblies method off of that. And then that'll show you what .NET assemblies, or think of it as namespaces. Assembly, namespace, they're basically the same thing. So it'll show you what assemblies or namespaces are loaded. And notice, for instance, here, see like system.directory services. So that one's fine. System.directory-services.protocols. And I'm looking for any other system.directory services, and I don't see any more. Okay, you guys maybe can poke this out in the video here. Pause it, have a look, but I don't see any other system.directory services. I see this one here, and I see this one here, and that's it. So I don't see system.directoryservices.account management. I don't see that namespace or that assembly. So what I could do to load it is I can do add type, and the assembly name in this case is system.directory services.account management. Okay, and if that is available out of the .NET framework that's installed in your computer, that can be loaded. And if I bring this list back up here, we can see that that's now loaded. All right. So now that means my command should run here. Okay, so if I look at $ds, I could see there's information in there, and if I pipe it to get member, I could see, hey, I just made a principal context object, and there's that validate credentials method ready to go. So it's showing me it does return a Boolean object. I see validate credentials, and it's showing me username and password are the arguments that are needed. Okay, which again, you could go track through the actual documentation here as well. So if I look at validate credentials, I could see again, it takes two strings. The first string is the username, second string is the password. So to validate those credentials. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. So there's my object. I'll call the validate credentials method. And the first value would be the username. So I have a user called user1. And then the second value would be the password. And so on user1, the password is literally YouTube1. That is what I have set as the password. And so, so again, in Active Directory, users, user1. Okay. So hit enter and notice it returns a true. So that's telling me that to Active Directory, this is correct. So this user has this password. And if I change it to maybe YouTube 2, notice it does not return a true. It returns an error, in its output. So if I don't necessarily want that, I might need to change this around a little bit. So if you're working with commandlets and you don't want them to show the error, there's usually like you could do error action, set it to silently continue or something like that. But we don't have that. We're not working with a commandlet here. We're working with the output of a method from an object that's in a variable. So we're not using a commandlet that has an error action parameter on it. So how do I cut the error output and have it return just false if this is a wrong credential that was supplied? So what you could do is utilize a very small try-catch construct. So I can put try here, and then this is the code I'm trying, right? And then do a catch, and the catch have it return a Boolean false if it's not, if this returns anything other than true. All right, so if I go ahead and run that, I can see the false for the incorrect credential, and a 1 returns the true. Okay, so now just with this caveat here, I was just using, validate credentials and creating a principal context object just as a .NET kind of example here. So I have seen some folks online talk about how this doesn't always work. Because there's, I guess, some issue with how validate credentials does its thing on a principal context object. So what I would say is if you're going to query, I've never seen anybody complain about the query not working once. Like you load up the object, you load up the principal context object in the variable, then you run validate credentials. So I've never seen anybody complain about that working once. It's that there might be some issues with it um, working multiple times, or if the user changes their password, sometimes the old password would actually validate as true as well. So it appears to be some bugs in here. So I'm not here to say this is perfect. It's just again a .NET example. Um, I do know of another way to do this. I might make another video out of that. That's a little more thorough in what you could do. And so I might put something like that out if anybody's interested in doing validate credentials. But I'm just using this here as just a .NET example. Here's a class. I use a constructor to make an object. I call a method from that object. Okay. So the last one I want to do. Oh, by the way, if you are doing this, another trick that I did see some folks mention online is when you're done with the principal context object, but you're leaving the PowerShell session or the PowerShell script running or whatever, a trick is to take it and call the dispose method. and that kind of clears out the object's connection to Active Directory. And then if you need to do it again, you could just reload a new principal context, and it's like you're starting from scratch again. So using that dispose method that's available on the object as well. All right. So the last one here, which to me is probably the most handy one out of Active Directory, and I'm going to be making a script out of this, a script video in a bit here. So that's kind of the whole point of this particular video, is to get everybody used to doing some .NET stuff. Because I'm going to be utilizing some of this in upcoming build a script videos that I'm going to be putting out. So this is just kind of a prerequisite. So the problem here that I'm going to use .NET to solve here is, let's say in Active Directory, it's, I don't want to say fairly common, but I mean it's something that could happen where you want to find out, everything a user maybe has access to, right? And so in a lot of resources in your network, there may be permissioned to groups. So like, for instance, like the user is, let's go to member, the user is a member of some groups, and that might be the start of figuring out, who has permission to what. Now, if you go off of, let's say the principle of um, ADGLP. Accounts go into global groups. Those global groups go into domain local groups. The domain local groups get permissions on the resource. Or in newer Microsoft literature, it's IGDLA. Identities go into global groups go into domain local groups, and those domain local groups get access, IGDLA. Right? So the I for identity, G for global, DL for domain local, and then A for access or authorization, or whatever you want the A to stand for there. Now the problem though is it's not always easy to see that nesting where one group's a member of another. So like I have a global group, let's say IT here, and just, I mean, because I set up this lab environment, let's say the IT group is a member of this group, which is a domain local group. And if you look at the name of it, it's IT data read. So let's say I had a file share called data on a file server somewhere, and the IT group would have read access to that. That's what this group would get permissions for. So basically, like in the domain local groups, you name the group based on the resource, so in this case the data share, and the permission that it gets. So just looking at the group, I can tell what permission it gets if you're a member of it. Okay, so the members of this are the IT group, and then the IT group, user one is a member of. Okay, now the problem is, being able to find the nesting of that, right? So if I'm just looking at user one, I just see the group memberships, the direct group memberships. So user one is a member of the IT group and the chassis tac users group. Chassis tac's the name of my test domain here. So those are the direct memberships, and anyone who's a user is a member of domain users as well. But anyway, but I don't see in the properties of user one that the IT group is a member of another group, and that's, getting permissions to a resource. So I don't see the existence of that nest. So I don't see that, user one is a member of IT and IT is a member of this group, and then this group is what has permissions on the resource. So I don't see the group nesting. And that's a problem. Like if you're trying to figure out, what group somebody's a member of, it might be nice to see their direct group memberships and their nested group memberships. Okay, so like both things. Okay, so even if you PowerShell it, so if I do something like get 80 user, identity user1. Okay. So the default output that comes back does not include member of the member of property. So let's tell it I want properties star. Let's see all the properties, okay, that come back from get 80 user. And notice there is a member of, and if you want to fully expand it out, the fact you see brackets there tells you that there's other objects inside of there, right? So if I want to spit that out, I need to enumerate it. So what I could do is send that over to for each object. Oops, helps if I spell for each, right? For each object, and the member name is I want the member of property. And I could see enumerated out the values that were in there. Okay, and notice it's the direct memberships, chassis tac users and IT. So that was the direct membership of user one. All right, so if we look at member of, there we go. So yeah, it didn't even include domain users in there in the PowerShell output. Okay, it just had the ones that an admin actually put user one in. So direct group memberships. Okay, so what I want is I want the nested stuff. Okay, so in this case, the PowerShell commandlets and their output, get 80 user, they're just not going to do it. So remembering the validate credentials, remember that there was a whole namespace, this account management namespace, and in it there's lots of other classes in here. Okay, so we were doing the principal context class, but notice there's a computer principal class, there's a group principal class, and the one that I'm looking for is this user principal. So if I open that class up, I can see, we'll come back to the constructors in a moment, but I see like properties here, and there's a lot of info that could be had about a user. So think of it as almost like a different set of .NET objects for managing objects in Active Directory. And if we look at methods, there is a get authorization groups method. So it returns a collection of principal objects that contain all the authorization groups for which the user is a member. This function only returns groups that are security groups. Okay, but that might be one I might want to check out. Okay, so like if you're trying to reason it out, trying to put the logic together for what you want, that might be what I'm interested in. All right, now, um, so so I need to make an object to call this method. So I need a user principal object to call this method. So I can come up to the constructors part. And on the constructors, if you kind of look at them, the constructors are making a new object, okay, which in this case is not really what I want. Okay, I don't want to make a new user. I have a user already. Okay, let's say I want to use user one, right? I have a user already. So I'm not going to go the constructors route here. So instead, just working with this object, if I go down to the methods, there's a couple query methods. So see find by bad password, find by expiration, find by identity. Okay, and this is these find by identity ones here. You could see like this one, for instance, find by identity. This one takes a principal context object, which is what we made in the last example, right? So that was where we're specifying the domain, like an Active Directory one, and then this identity value, the identity of the user principal. Okay, so it needs an identity type enumeration, which if you want to look it up, it is a string, but like what strings could it be? So if I look up that one, I could query the user by distinguished name, GUID, name, SAM account name, SID, or user principal name. So any of these would be acceptable. for that other argument. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we're going to first of all create the principal context object, which we did earlier. Okay, so we're going to create this with the exact same commandlet, in all honesty, and then we'll feed an argument to the used. We'll feed a method to the user principal class, which should find the user for us. Okay, so let's do those pieces. So the first thing is we don't have to load the assembly. The assembly's already been loaded, right? But in case we forgot, this was the command to load the assembly. Okay, so that's what we did there to load account management. So then we're going to need the principal context. So let me just bring that commandlet back up. I'll literally just put it right back in the same variable. $ds, new object, account management, principal context, domain. Okay. Now, the next one, we need to get the user principal object. So I'll just load that into something called $user. And now we're calling a method from a class. So we're not using, remember, new object is when you're using a constructor. Okay. So you're supplying the argument list there. So I was using a constructor. Now for user principal, let's go back to that. For user principal, I don't want to use the constructors because I don't want to make a new user. I already have a user that already exists, user one. So what I want is I want to use one of these methods here on the class. So I want to use this find by identity method here, where I supply the principal context, which was in $ds that I just ran a moment ago, and the string, which would be the name of the user. Okay? So let's do that. So I need to call the class in the brackets, kind of like we did with the math method or um, um, the math, not the math method, the math class, or the PS credential class from earlier. So we want to call that. Okay, so that would be system dot directory services dot account management dot user principal. Okay, so there's the class, and then my two colons, and then the method, which is find by identity. So good kind of trick here to know if you're typing everything incorrect is if it tab completes. So if you notice here, this tab completed out, and once I did the double colon, the method tab completed as well. Okay, so we needed the principal context, which was $ds, and then the user that I want to look for, which in this case was user one. Okay, and we'll close the argument list for this method. And then if I look at $user, I can see that it should have queried. Okay, so I can see, yeah, user principal name, there's the SID, SAM account name. Cool. So we got that user loaded. Okay, so again, bring this back up here. And this created in this variable, this code here grabbed the user principal object that we were making. Okay, so if I look at $user and pipe it to get member, I'm seeing user principal. All right. And notice that now that I have this object, I can see, hey, there's the get authorization groups method that we could call off of that object. Okay, so that would be $user dot what was it? Get authorization groups. Okay, and I do believe that method did not need any arguments. Get authorization groups. Okay, I can't really make it out here, so let's go back to the documentation, the true documentation, and get authorization groups. Oh yeah, so notice, um, see right here where it shows, it doesn't show a good picture of it here. But notice it doesn't see any arguments, right? It just says, hey, this is what it returns. And in fact, if you look at it here, notice there's nothing in the parentheses. See how that's just an empty set of parentheses. Okay, if it takes arguments, it would look something like this here. See, like get groups, parentheses, principal context, close parentheses. Okay, so that would all, that would be that argument, if you will. Okay, so get authorization groups doesn't need any arguments, so we could just call it like so. Okay, so here's the user principal object, and then dot, and then the name of the method, and then the empty argument list. And yes, even if a method takes no arguments, you still have to supply an empty argument list. So I hit enter, and wow, that threw up a lot of stuff here. So what I might want to do is clean up the output a bit. It looks like the names of the groups are in a property called name. Right? And they're also in SAM account name as well. So maybe I'll use that just to keep it Active Directory specific here. And so get authorization groups, and then let's maybe send that over to select object property SAM account name. And then right there, here's all of the groups that user one is a member of. So you could see the direct ones, like there's chassis tac users and IT right here, but also notice the nested group showed up as well, in addition to all of the other groups that Active Directory makes you a member of. So these are all the dynamic groups that you're a member of just by using Active Directory, if you will. So you can see like the authenticated users, everyone, users, pre-auth compatible access, domain users. So you get all of that, all of those other ones in there as well. Okay, so that was again another way of utilizing a .NET object to get what we needed. All right. So with that, I'm gonna close that video. Well, actually, before I close it, let's just do one other one here, just to prove. So user two, my user two account, member of sales, and then sales is nested in um, this other group, DL sales data read. Okay, so again, another nested membership. So if I bring back um, the user, so let's say $user this time, let's do user two. Okay, so I now have a different user in there, and same thing, get authorization groups. I could see this time for user two, they're a member of sales, and here's the nested group. So user two is a member of sales, and sales is a member of this other group here, this domain local. So that's again getting you the nested information as well. Okay, so with that, if you have any questions, comments, queries, please throw them in chat. Um, if you like the content, please consider liking and subscribing. It definitely helps with the popularity of my channel. Ideally, I do want to grow this so more people can kind of see what's going on. And lastly, thanks for watching. So we'll see you in the next video down the road.